Welcome to the Ames Public Library, both in person and online, for this program, brought to you through a partnership with Ames Public Library and the Outdoor Alliance of Story County. I'm Kathy Cooney, an Adult Services Librarian here at APL. The library's mission is to connect you to the world of ideas, which we do through diverse and inclusive resources and programming like tonight's event. For those of you here in person, this room is equipped with an induction loop for the benefit of hearing aid users. To use, just switch your hearing aid to T. We also have a hearing assistance device we can lend you. I have it in the back with me. Just let me know if you'd like to use it. For those with us virtually, we've enabled live captioning. If you're not seeing captions, turn them on by clicking the CC Live Transcript button in the Zoom menu bar and choosing closed captioning. We are recording today's session and it will be posted to the library's YouTube channel after the event. And we will have time for questions at the end. If you're on Zoom, please put them in the chat or Q&A. If you're here in person, I will come around with the microphone. We do want you to use the microphone to ask your questions so the folks on Zoom and on the recording can hear your questions. All right, with that, I will turn it over to Bruce to introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Kathy. Again, on behalf of the Outdoor Alliance and the Public Library, we welcome you all here tonight for our first winter outdoor presentation that the Outdoor Alliance sponsors with the library. So really happy to see this kind of a turnout. I'm Bruce White. I'm a board member of the Outdoor Alliance of Story County. I think you really have a treat in store for you for this evening's program. Many of you already know Hank, but I'll go ahead and give a little background about Hank. But this evening's program, One4Water, features our storyteller, Hank Kohler, recounting his travels down the Mississippi River. Trip by canoe, trip with a cause, as you will hear later on. My housekeeping items, Kathy's already covered most of them, but we do have a display in the back for Outdoor Alliance. I would welcome you to come back after Hank's done and visit with us about what Outdoor Alliance is all about. And also, Hank has a number of materials on the back table, some maps of the Mississippi River, his travels down there, and I'm not sure what else. And he also has a book that he'd like to offer to you for sale tonight that accounts of his trip down the river. So that we all take care of that afterwards, and he'll be glad to sign your book if you purchase one, I'm sure. Well, Hank Kohler, who many of you I'm sure already know, started life in 1952 in northwest Iowa and near the little town of Remsen in Plymouth County. Growing up on a farm outside of Remsen. He has a degree in education from the University of Northern Iowa. We can't hold that against him. My spouse also went to the University of Northern Iowa, so no argument there. However, having that, graduated from UNI, he never taught. He instead went into business and spent time in the hospitality business, and maybe you may remember him as owning the Happy Joe's pizza place here in Ames for many years until the flood of 2010. And that time there's a change that was made, I'm sure. Hank enjoys spending as much time as possible on the lakes and rivers in many places, as you'll hear. That's one of his goals in life, is spend as much time out there as possible. He was also the 2016 recipient of the Ames Isaac Walton League Chapter's Olaf Smeedel Conservation Award. In 1979, when he was in his 20s, he started on a trip with three other companions, one of which was his brother, if I'm not mistaken. And they started out from a spot up in Minnesota, and instead of going south like he did on this trip, he headed north to Hudson's Bay. So that trip was about 1,400 miles roughly. And it's a book that was written by one of his companions. It's an outstanding, interesting escapade that they had, including a polar bear somewhere along the way. So in 2021, 42 years after he did that trip going to Hudson Bay, he decided, well, let's try the reverse of that and start from the same spot up in Minnesota and let's go south down the Mississippi to New Orleans, to the Gulf of Mexico. So that adventure is called One4Water, as the book is also titled that. However, part of the reason he wanted to do this was not only for the experience of doing it, but he wanted to raise some money for a benefit. And so the money they raised along this trip, and continue to raise to some degree now, is for the National River Museum and Aquarium located in Dubuque, Iowa. And if any of you have not been there, I would highly recommend going there. It's an outstanding museum. So sit back, relax, try and imagine you're sitting around a campfire, a crackling fire, listening to a storyteller who we have with us tonight. And with that, I'll turn it over to our friend Hank Kohler. So take it away, Hank.
Well, thank you, Bruce, and thank you, Kathy, and thank all. Wait, it may not be worth that. Wait, see. Thank you all for being here. It sure means a lot to me, and thank the library for the invite, and of course the Outdoor Alliance of Story County. You know, you've probably heard people say this before. You can't make that up, but you know, people do all the time. It's called lying. But I had something that occurred to me that has to do with this One4Water a few months ago that I thought I'd share with you. It's kind of under the heading, you can't make this stuff up. I'd been asked to give this talk at a small town of Hudson, Iowa. You guys probably know where that is, just south of Cedar Falls area. And I went up there and told some stories, had a great time. And the lady in charge of it, her name was Mary. She really liked it. And she said, Hank, I'm going to tell the other libraries and other people in this area, you need to come back and tell your stories some other places. Well, sure enough, within a day or two, through a couple emails and stuff, I was getting in contact with Jessup and their library. And pretty soon I had an exact date, a time set up and everything to go up and tell my stories again. So I thought it'd be appropriate to tell Mary back in Hudson that I appreciate what she did. So I sent out an email that said, Mary, thank you very much for spreading the word. I've already been in contact with Jessup and I'm going up to speak with them soon. That's what I thought I sent out. Now my phone had done an autocorrect that I didn't realize until I saw that she had replied, because what I had sent is, Mary, thank you very much for spreading the word. I've already been in contact with Jesus, and I'm going up to speak with him soon. True story. And her reply was simply, Hank, you don't charge enough. So, hey, let's talk about these pictures real quick. Now, those were all taken during the trip that I just named One4Water, thought it was a good name for a trip going down the Mississippi and some other rivers in 2021. Now, I'm not going to stop any one of those pictures and say, this is where we were, this is what was going on, or whatever. They're there to give you something more entertaining to look at than me while I'm speaking to you. But with that said, there will be times you might see something that you're curious about and go, what the heck is that? Later on, when I'm done telling stories, I'll be trying to my best to answer all your questions. And please, at that time, say, Hank, what was going on there or what was going on in this situation with the pictures, okay? And some of the things I'm going to talk about, you're going to realize, hey, that's what that picture's about. And speaking of talking about, let's get you guys really involved in a canoe trip like this. And I think the best way to do that, to immerse you in a, wait a minute, let's not use immerse on a canoe trip. Let's engage you in a canoe trip is to have you use your imagination and pretend you're going with me, okay? So pretend that right outside there, first of all, it's a beautiful day in June. It's not the temperatures we have now. There's a whole bunch of canoes, all the paddles you need, and a whole bunch of nice life jackets, those personal flotation devices. So look around the room, pick out somebody as your partner, and pretend now you're jumping in that canoe, you got your paddle, and snap that life jacket on tight, because the day I'm going to pick out, it gets a little sporty later on. Now, we're going to start out waking up in Bellevue, Iowa, and our goal then that day is to try to get to Clinton, Iowa, or the lock and dam just upstream from that, which is about 30 or 35 miles away. Now, that's about the range that we needed to do on this trip to make it from June 3rd to be done with the trip by about August 7th. I had some great people helping me on the trip, and the guy who was going to do the very last stretch initially said, Hank, whenever you need me until whatever, doesn't matter, it's open-ended, I'll be your last guy, which was great. But about 3 days later, he said, my wife says that I need to be back home by at least the 10th of August. So that meant that we had kind of an end game we had to try to get to. So we would be pushing on these paddles to make sure we did our 30 or 35 miles a day. So that's what we got to do today. Now, we don't have much current today because of the lock and dam situations on the upper Mississippi. Instead of going down a free-flowing river, a lot of times you're instead on big bodies of water pooled up behind the dams. And as we approach the lock and dam above Clinton, it widens out to this huge shallow lake called Pool 13. That's what we're heading for. Now, as the day goes on, we're going to make a stop about once at the tiny town of Sebula. Maybe some of you know where that is. It's the only town in Iowa that is entirely on an island. And this is a unique day, not just because I got a whole bunch of friends in canoes off to my left that are sitting here, but because at Sebula, we're going to make some changes. See, the guy named Jared, who was in front of the canoe for the last few days, had to get back to work. Imagine that. But a good friend of mine, he actually lives in Story City. He's a firefighter here in Ames. His name's Cale Doyle, even though he's half my age. But Cale was going to show up and jump in the canoe and be my partner for the next 5 to 7 days. Also, there would be times on One4Water that people were really excited about it, and they'd say, Hank, we really appreciate what you're doing. Can we be part of it? Not just by donating some money, but can we come and paddle along with you? Now, we welcome that. But of course, if somebody's in the front of my canoe and then I got all the gear and then me, if somebody says, hey, I want to paddle with you, they got to have their own vessel. So on this day, a good friend of ours named Dustin showed up in a shiny new kayak. And now we've got out in the river, all of you folks in your canoes. We've got Dustin in his kayak, Cale's in the front with me, and off we go, leaving Sebula and heading towards Clinton. And I asked Cale the same 2 questions I asked everybody when they joined me in the canoe. I said, do you feel safe and do you feel comfortable? And his answer was about the same as everybody, somewhat and for now. And off we go. Now, like I said, it's a beautiful day, little bit of a tailwind, so we're not pushing a headwind, but we don't have much current. What we do have, though, is white fluffy clouds in the sky above us and some other white things soaring and doing their circle route above us. Huge flocks of those magnificent white pelicans, birds that wingspan longer than I can reach my old arms out. Just lovely birds. And I'd always considered them a harbinger of good luck. There are different times in my life and different places that things were kind of sketchy, but I'd see a pelican and everything was good. So I thought they were always good luck, right? And as we're going along, they're not only soaring above us, but of course there are several flocks beyond the river ahead of us. And when we got a little too close for their comfort, they'd splash and flop and take off. And this repeated itself many times as the afternoon went off. Except one time it was different. This flock took off and one of them remained. There was one pelican that we realized could not fly. Now, it could still swim, and it could still swim really fast, but it couldn't fly away, and which meant that in months from now, if it can't get further south, it's not going to live. So Cale turns to me and says, Henry, I know you think that they're lucky birds. Why don't we see if we can capture that one, untangle whatever it is all messed up with, and it'll be like putting a big deposit in the bank of good karma. I said, well, there's nothing wrong with that. Now, let's see if we can get him. Now, keep in mind, this was a very lucky pelican, because I swear, if it was just Cale and I in the canoe, we couldn't have caught it. He could still go too fast. Excuse me, but we had Dustin in that kayak heading it off, and we keep going to the west, to the starboard side, going towards the shore, going through mat after mat of big lily pads. But we're getting closer to it, and it's getting closer to the shallows. And pretty soon, Dustin's around this side, and I went like that, and I hit the bottom. I yelled, go get him, High Pockets. And with that, Cale jumped out, Dustin jumped out, and pretty soon, in the mud and the slop and the lily pads and the water, this bird is flopping. He doesn't know he's being saved. So he is beating the heck out of him with that big old bill and those wings. But they were able to free him, and it wasn't fishing line. It was little tiny fine wire somebody got all tangled up with. But Cale had some side cutters. A fireman, he's got everything he needs, and a snip, snip, snip. Pretty soon he's got a ball of wire, and we got a free pelican. Good to go. We've done our good job for the day. We feel pretty lucky, right? That's good. We may have to take a deposit or a withdrawal, a little bit later. So now the afternoon is going along. We get back out the river, and we try to stay in the channel, because if you're in the channel, you can go faster. We're going along and still have this little tailwind. The sun's starting to get towards those clouds on the starboard, or towards the trees, on the starboard side over to the west. So it's about time to decide, where are we going to camp? Now, our options are to go back through that, hopefully find a nice level place where we can set up our tents and be allowed to, that we're not on somebody's place that we shouldn't be. Or if we go straight ahead, in fact, if you look down there, look way down there now, it's still about a mile and a half away, but you can see the dam now. You can see the dam, and you notice that it's kind of quiet on the Illinois side. That's where the lock chamber is. And over on this right side is about a quarter mile of real turbulent, frothy water. It's called the rollers. That's where most of the water goes through the dam. We referred to that area as CD, certain death, something we absolutely needed to avoid. And we're sitting out here looking at it, and we're going, hey, it's right there. Let's go and try to get through the lock. Now, how that would work, as we got close enough to a lock and dam facility, I had this little marine radio that I bought, and I had the channel that would talk to the people at the lock or talk to the towboat captains. And when we got within between a quarter and a half mile out, I'd push the button and say, hey, like on this situation, I'd go, hey, lock and dam number 13, this is a southbound canoe approaching your facility, over. And right then I knew we were rookies, because southbound. There's nobody paddling upstream, but there I went and said it. And now what he's supposed to say is we have no traffic at all. When you get close enough, call again, we'll open the gates and let you in. So now we're going downstream, right? So they've got this water dammed up. If we come up to the lock chamber, those gates open, we go in. Those gates close, the water is lowered to the level of the river down below. Those gates open, we go out, easy peasy mac and cheesy, we're back in the river and going. And we went through like 27 of those locks as that summer went on, and only probably 5 of them did the guy on the radio say, hey, go over to this area, sit tight where it's safe. We'll let you know when you come in. We've got some traffic in here. See, now we were allowed to go through those locks just like any big barge or any pleasure boats. We had just as much right, but on a priority basis, and we are obviously the lowest rung on the ladder. So if there's anybody else around, we would have to wait. But that's what we've decided to do. You guys were all in agreement. We decided now we're going to try to go through this lock and then maybe find a place to camp down below. So we're going along. Now we have to have an angle about like this. So we hit the lock chamber. Now the lock chamber itself is just a great big concrete box. Okay, it's about 35, let's get this right. Yeah, about 35 yards wide and 200 yards long. That's big enough for a tow or tug to be pushing 9 barges, like 3 opaque and 3 long. So that's what we're going to head for. And we're going along, and all of a sudden, inexplicably, I mean, I grew up as a farmer in Iowa, and Dad always said this, the wind goes down with the sun. Okay, and this is a north breeze. But when the sun got about there to the clouds, bam, and not a storm, still blue skies, we got hit with winds 25 to 30 miles an hour, just like that. And almost immediately, because we're in this huge shallow pool, we are in wind and waves above my pay grade. In other words, we're in a tight spot. This isn't good. Now, we can't go back this way. We can't go to certain depth over here. The only thing we can do to make it through here is to keep going through and to get to the safety of that great big lock chamber. So we got to keep the canoes right at this angle. You guys are doing good. You're not heavily loaded, so you're doing a little better. But us, pretty soon, we're taking a little water. And you know how that works in a canoe? You take in more, you weigh more. The next wave, you take in more. Now, you talk about a compounding situation that's not good. The canoe goes down, the anxiety goes up, just like that. But that's the way it's going. But, you know, what's great is we can see where we have to get to. All we got to do is get there. Turn that corner, we're going to be good. Turn that corner, we're going to be good. We turn that corner, we weren't good at all. There was a barge in there coming out at us. You see, I never took the time to reach down below me, the waterproof tote. I got to open that up, get the radio. I mean, what would this take? 30 seconds to call them? I couldn't get off the paddle or the canoe would swing. Of course, I'm back, you know, I'm in the stern because I always want to be in charge whether I'm good at it or not. So I had not radioed, and we did not know the status of the situation until we turned the corner where we thought we were going to be safe. Now we had to leave there right now. So the only thing we could do now is cut straight across in front of that thing. Now, of course, we're taking a little more water because we're broadside. Then we have to turn into the waves. And now we're on the shore. We're on the Illinois shore, but we're not really. We're against the 15-foot high concrete wall. We can't get out there. We have to go straight against that wall and get to the actual shore, which is the riprap, those great big limestone rocks that are scattered all over the shore up there. And fortunately for us, it's only like 70 yards away. Once again, it's comforting to see where you're going. It's right there. All we got to do is get there, get there. I don't care if we got a bunch of water in here now, we're going to make it. And we did. By the way, you guys were perfect. You all got out and put your canoes up there. Here comes Dustin, the kayak. He's fine. We hit those rocks, and of course, it's pretty steep. So Cale jumps out, grabs the front of the canoe, which meant the canoe went like that, and everything in the back half, including me, is floating. So I am trying to, things are floating up by me. I'm throwing things at them, and we've got that whole bunch of limestone rock covered with our equipment and stuff. It looked like a debris field from a plane crash. But here we were now safe, all wet, standing there in the cold wind, canoe upside down, kayak there, our stuff laying all over it. Here comes the four-wheeler. The guy coming down a trail from the Corps of Engineers. He goes, "You guys okay?" I said, "Yeah, we are." I said, I didn't mean to get us in that scary situation, but when we got there and that wind started, there wasn't anything we could do except we have to go through it. He says, "Yeah, we watch you." He said, "You did a really good job. We're glad you made it here." He says, "Now I got to go right back to work." But he said, "If you're still here tomorrow morning," I'm like, "Where else are we going to go?" He says, "I'll come back with this vehicle and we can drag you and your canoe down below and get you back on the river." I said, "Great, thank you." And I asked him, I said, if we decide to, can we just get all this wet stuff over on the other side of these rocks, kind of out of the wind, and camp there? And he goes, it's pretty sketchy down there, but if that's, go ahead if you want to. About this time, 2 other vehicles showed up. One was a brand new, white, shiny, brand new pickup. The other one was a real old, but very, very well kept, elegant car, like a Cadillac or Bonneville or something. Out of the pickup jumped 2 young people, a young couple. I don't know if they're married or just friends, but anyhow, they jump out with fishing poles. The guy goes, yeah, we like coming out here fishing. Boy, is it windy. Do you guys need any help? I said, well, all I can get. And within a few minutes now, because we got both of them helping, the 3 of us, we had a kayak, we had a canoe, we had all of our gear, 3 wet guys bouncing back down that trail that 4-wheeler just disappeared. And now we get down there by the big dam facility, the facility down there, and off to our left is soft grass, a picnic table, restroom facilities, a big sign that says no camping. And about the time I looked at that, I look up, and here's the guy from the Corps of Engineers standing there, and I said, sir, I said, we got 3 little tents. We'd pick up any trash we see, which I didn't see any anyhow. I said, we'll never litter. I said, we'll be gone in the morning. You won't know we were here. And he says, you're not supposed to. Go ahead. And I swear that happened 4 other times as my trip went on. I would be at a Corps facility with signs saying restricted area, keep out, no camping. But if I asked them, they said, yeah, no, you're not supposed to, but go ahead, just for the night. So, our evening got so much better, About that time, the young couple in the pickup said, hey, we're going to run to town. We'll bring you back a bag full of hamburgers and a couple of malts or a couple of beers, your choice. Away they go, before you can even argue. Now, remember, there was this other old car that had showed up, right? Well, this car comes back down there and he parks and he goes, yeah, the missus and I like to come out here walking, but Jesus, windy. He says, you know what? You boys had quite a thing out there, didn't you? I said, yes, sir. And his name was Irv. I don't remember his bride of 65 years, but he was Irv. They had to be in their middle 90s. And he goes, yeah. He said, why don't I make your evening a little better? I'll go in town and get you pizza. I said, Irv, that would be awesome. But listen, these other people said they're bringing, oh, no, I'll get you pizza. I'll get you one. He wasn't going to be denied. But I said, hey, Irv, look at us. I mean, obviously, we eat anything. Cheap, most convenient, whatever. Once again, he interrupted. He says, I'll bring you back a good one. And he winks. He goes, I'm loaded. So we had run into the well-to-do Irv. Now we've got our tent set up. We had more food than you could possibly eat. Half the pizza's in the cooler for the next day. And I'm about to fall asleep, and I hear Kale yell from his tent over there. He goes, Henry. I go, what? I'm trying to fall asleep. He goes, do you ever notice that the more hopeless we look, the more people want to help us? And yeah, he'd only been with me a day, But he was absolutely right. Several times as the trip went on, when things were getting a little sideways, either something would occur or many times just the right person would show up and it'd all be better, just like that. I mean, I was very lucky, and I'm sure it wasn't just the pelican, but very good fortune. Now, a question people would have is, why would a guy 1 year before he's going to turn 70 decide he wants to spend a whole summer in a canoe and sleeping on sandbars and doing that kind of a thing? I mean, why would I want to do that at my age? Well, it goes all the way back to my growing up on that family farm outside of Remsen, in the 50s and 60s. We were poor. We didn't know it because everybody was poor. But, we worked hard. We ate like kings because we had cattle, hogs, chickens. So I'd come home from school and open the fridge, and there'd be maybe tomatoes in there, or that'd be in the summer. But, I mean, there'd be a big ham or leftover burgers. I mean, we ate like kings. And although we worked real hard, we always had something to look forward to. It's actually made me feel special compared to some of my classmates in that. And that is that the last week of the summer, just before school would start, every year we would take a 1-week summer vacation. Now, in the middle of that night, all of us kids, and there was a pile of us, we'd get stuffed in the station wagon. On the luggage rack on top, one half had suitcases, the other half had fishing poles, and Dad would make a left turn at that driveway and head for Minnesota, to Otter Tail County, Minnesota, to be precise, because way back in the 1930s, when my grandfather had kind of retired, he bought a cabin on a lake up in that region. So my dad had spent some time up there and was familiar with how beautiful it was, what the lakes were like, and what fish we could catch. And I tell you what, Those vacations to me, I look forward to them more than any Christmas, any birthday. I mean, we would get up there, we would find northern pike, a few walleyes, bass, crappies, fish that we didn't find on our little sand pits near us in Remsen. I didn't even know they existed except for Minnesota when I was a little kid. I thought that's the only place you could catch those fish. But it wasn't just the fish, it was the loons, the lily pads, the herons and the frogs. I mean, this was like Shangri-La. This place was absolutely perfect for me. And what Dad would look for going up there, and sometimes he'd make a phone call ahead of time, but a lot of times he'd just show up and he'd start driving around these little lakes. And, back in the 50s and 60s, there were what we called mom and pop resorts. There'd be a little resort, maybe have 5 to 10 cabins on it. And Dad was looking for just the right one. It had to be rustic and primitive, meaning cheap. The cheaper, the better. And when he found a nice lake with a cheap cabin, we would move into that for the week. And of course, an old wooden rowboat came with the cabin rental. We'd have no motors or anything back then. There'd be an old rusty Folgers coffee can bouncing around at the bottom of it because when you first put it in the water, the seams leaked a little. Well, something happened on one of those vacations when I was 10 years old that changed my life. Dad had used his arms and the oars to take us out in front to a place that he thought was good, and we were still fishing. Now, I don't know if it's because still fishing because we weren't moving or because we weren't catching anything, so things were pretty still. But there we sat, and we are soaked. I mean, there are cascades of water coming down on us from this big storm. But if you're just up there for a week, you can't let a little thing like a severe thunderstorm scare you back to your cabin. So there we sat, drenched, soaked, and not catching anything. And I'm taking that old Folgers can like this and throwing the water out. And Dad asked me a question. I think as much to take my mind off the situation we were in as to check my knowledge of the local geography. But he sat there like this. He goes, "Henry, these drops of water that are falling on us today, where do they finally end up on their journey to the sea?" And of course, at the age of 10, I knew everything, completely confident and proud. I said, "Dad, somehow the water in this lake will get out of here into a small stream, which will flow into a little bigger river. That river will get into the Mississippi and go all the way to the Gulf of Mexico." He didn't even look up. He just sat there and watched the water run off his hat. He goes, "No, this water goes north." Well, I had to look that up. I get back to school, and he was absolutely right. Actually, in the lake we were on, the water first goes west in what is called the Otter Tail River system. When it joins the Bois de Sioux coming from the south at two little towns called Breckenridge and Wahpeton, it then forms the Red River of the North, and it flows north. And for most of its distance, it is the boundary between North Dakota and Minnesota. And then it flows north and flows into Canada, into the province of Manitoba. From there, it goes a few miles and goes through the beautiful city of Winnipeg. And then about 60 miles, wait a minute, we're in Canada now. About 90 kilometers later, it dumps into Lake Winnipeg, which is over 300 miles long and about 60, 70 miles wide at its widest. It's a beautiful, awesome, inspiring, terrifying lake. And from there, when it empties Lake Winnipeg, it still has 400 miles of absolute pristine Manitoba wilderness to get to the mouth of the Hayes River at a historic site called York Factory in Hudson Bay. York Factory was the first Hudson Bay outpost built in North America centuries ago. Excuse me for a second. Well, that was when I was 10 years old, I found out about that. So it took me 17 years, mostly of just growing up, and then dreaming, and then actually planning. But in the spring of 1979, myself and 3 companions left in 2 canoes from a little tiny lake near where we have a cabin up there called East Leaf Lake. And we wanted to start at that area because we were in the Mississippi watershed then, but we wanted to say that we followed the old fur trading route and did the great big ports, a mile and a quarter is all about, to get into the Otter Tail River and then flow north. So in 1979, 4 of us went about 1,400 miles in 70 days from East Leaf Lake, Minnesota to Hudson Bay. Far enough north that even though we're not near the Arctic Circle yet, but that Hudson Bay is a denning area for polar bears. So we got to see, while we're waiting for a float plane to come and take us part of the way back home to try to get back to Winnipeg, we got to see a big white bear lope by. It was an incredible journey. We were all in our 20s. And of course, we did it just for the fun, for the challenge and adventure, to see if we could do it. Back then you didn't have cell phones, of course. We didn't have any GPS. I just got the maps from Parks Library here, put a bunch of plastic over and put some Scotch tape around them so they're somewhat waterproof. And we followed them all the way to Hudson Bay, and we didn't get lost, and it worked. You know, we didn't do this to try to raise funds for anybody. We weren't trying to find ourselves. We weren't trying to lose ourselves. We just wanted to see if we could do it. And because of that, we called the trip, and there were 4 of us, the Trek of the Halibut 4, because there were 4 of it. And say it with me, folks, it was just for the halibut. Well, anyhow, it was a marvelous journey. And many years later, Denny, who was only 20 at the time, the youngest one of the group, wrote this marvelous book about a summer, a dream, an adventure, and all the experiences that we had. And I believe it's here in the library. And what's really cool is the title, if you can see it, it's called This Water Goes North. He paid tribute to those words my dad had spoken to me decades earlier. So now that happens in 1979. Life goes on, right? Life goes on for a long time. My lovely wife, Ann, who's sitting right there, we raise a beautiful family. We moved from Ames to Muscatine, then back to Ames. We start raising 3 wonderful kids. And of course, I'm trying to take them fishing and canoeing whenever I can. I do some trips on the Missouri River in Montana, the Little Missouri River in North Dakota, of course, the Boundary Waters, a place called Woodland Caribou Provincial Park. I mean, marvelous, marvelous trips, but none are any more special than the times we'd have our kids on the Boone River or the Des Moines River. You know, I'm just saying this to let you know how many days and hours I've spent in nature that is so fabulous to me, but it left me with a feeling of guilt. In other words, through my education and work, I was never a scientist. I have done no research. I can tell you about a wonderful place, but I don't know how to preserve and protect it. You know, so I've always kind of felt guilty about that. Years ago, I read some of, there's an old French guy with a word, that a name that we can't pronounce, but fortunately, he simply called himself Voltaire. You probably heard of the dude. He used to say a bunch of cool things, but one of the more important things that he said is this. He said, each and every one of us is guilty of the good we did not do. And that always kind of stuck with me, especially, like I said, I could tell you about these wonderful places, and I don't know how to make them stay that way for the next 500 years or so. So that was always stuck in my craw. Well, in 2020, about this time of the year, about 6 weeks before COVID was going to change everything, I was going up to our little cabin that we have now, that my wife and I bought, our family, on a beautiful lake, about 7 miles from where that trip to Hudson Bay had started. And as I was going along, I was thinking of the ice fishing trip. I'm by myself and how much fun I'm going to have. But then I'm getting close to this little Leaf River that comes out of East Leaf Lake where we started that trip. And I had, honest to God, a moment of unbelievable excitement. I'm not going to be able to explain it to you, but I had, well, I don't have any hair on my head, but the hair on my arms was sticking up. I had goosebumps. It was like electricity going through me. And I knew instantly I was going to do something. I can describe it as this: why not go the other direction? I knew immediately when I crossed that frozen little stream that not that summer, because it takes some planning, but in the 2021, I was going to go from the very same boat ramp where we went north and take it all the way south. How cool would that be? But I needed this to be my chance to try to pay back that debt I owed. So immediately, I hadn't gone a quarter mile, and I called a good friend of mine. Maybe some of you know him. His name is Rick Cruz, or Dr. Rick Cruz. He's an agronomist here at Iowa State. He travels around the world doing one simple thing: trying to save the planet. That's all he's doing. That's why I call him Superman. He is an expert in trying to convince people that we have to have clean water and good soil, or we can't live here. It's as simple as that. But he goes all around trying to tell people that we got to have that. So I call Rick. I go, Superman. He goes, what's up? I said, Rick, not this summer, but next summer. You know where we started that canoe trip to Hudson Bay? Well, I'm going to start the very same boat ramp. I'm going to go to the Gulf of Mexico. He said, what? I said, no, Rick, I'm going to do it. Absolutely. But this time it has to count. It can't just be for the fun. I said, I need to find some sort of a conservation-minded entity that could use donated funds if I could convince nice people to donate money to the uniqueness of this journey. And he said, I'll make some calls. He's well connected. And within 2 or 3 days, a marriage or partnership, you want to call it, between this entity that I simply decided to call One4Water and the National Mississippi River Museum and Aquarium in Dubuque, which is a Smithsonian affiliate. Wonderful people. They got a fabulous museum, huge aquariums. But they also have what's called the Take Care Initiative, which stands for Conservation Action Through Advocacy, Research, and Engagement. And what they do with those programs is they impact kids from grade school through college, basically just teach them to get outside, Take responsibility for your own watershed. Do things that are good that will help things in the future. Plant a tree, plant pollinators, never litter, pick up trash. Just simple things. It doesn't have to be something huge, but just in your local area, do the right thing so it'll always stay better. So they had exactly the type of programs I hoped I could raise funds for. The other thing they had that I didn't know anything about is how do you raise those funds? You know, I'm going to do this kind of cool trip that I think is kind of unique. I've called it One4Water, but how do we get people to say, hey, yeah, I guess I'll donate some money for those people? Well, they're a museum. They're always looking for money. So they know how to do those kinds of things. Within a couple of weeks, they had me up there. And we did a promotional and informational video where I talked about One4Water, the history, the mission, a little bit about the trip north, where I'm going to go, what the funds are going to be used for, what impact they will have. So that's up on their webpage and running. And this will be the summer now of 2020. And then they did a Facebook fundraising page. Now, up to that point, now I know quite a bit about Facebook now, but then I didn't. But you know, it's a pyramid scheme, isn't it? Because somebody shares with somebody that shares with somebody that shares some. I tell you what, by like September of 2020, they had so many followers on this One4Water Facebook page. They were getting all sorts of donations coming in already. And I hadn't put the paddle in the water yet. You know, so I had to get going. I had things I had to do, stuff I had to get. Now, I decided right away that the trip was going to be self-funded. In other words, any donations went to the museum, didn't come to Hank. So anything that I had to buy or travel expenses, lodging, anything's my dime. And if you know me, I'm cheap, which meant if I had it and it worked, it went. Well, I had a nice used aluminum canoe, sturdy, didn't leak. Bingo, it went. I'm not going to buy something fancy for this trip. I had a canoe, didn't leak. I had the tents already. I had the mess kit. I had the cooking stuff. This fine bench shaft paddle was a gift from Jack's, people right here in Ames. They gave us one and sold me another at a discount. And in return, I bought some paddling gloves and a solar panel out there. My daughter found online some really neat seats that we could sit in. You know, it doesn't hurt your behind. I mean, it doesn't help your behind at all. That was sore all summer. But at least you could change your posture a little bit. And I got the radio. And I got those big maps. Now, we don't really need maps on this trip. I mean, I'm in civilization the whole time. I'm going downstream. But like I said, we need to try to go 30 to 35 miles a day. So it's nice to have a starting point and then a goal. So I got all that stuff, right? I got the canoe, I got the tents, I got everything, right? No, I don't have the most important thing. I needed people. I had to have somebody with me in the front of that canoe. I was not going to do that trip by myself all summer. I needed people up there for safety, for speed, and for company. If some of you know me well enough to know that I have this strange habit of either talking or singing just as the day goes on. And I don't know how to read music. I cannot play an instrument. Oh, God, I wish I could. I tried when I was a kid. I can't do it. But that doesn't keep me from appreciating songs and their lyrics and melodies. So I will just break into song as the day goes on. Like I'm floating down the river, I could be doing John Denver and it morphs into Harry Chapin. The next thing you know, we're doing Blackwater by the Doobie Brothers. So I needed somebody up front that wouldn't mind me singing off key as the day goes on. Well, the first idea, of course, was to call those old guys, the three that went to Hudson Bay, like putting the band back together, right? But there's something about trying to get people excited about a canoe trip when you're 20 or 25 as compared when you're 65 or 67. So it didn't happen. Not one of those three gentlemen were with me on One4Water, but they all were there when I left that spring day. So that meant a lot to me. The next thing, of course, I did is ask my family. My son could go, but only for a few days right before the 4th of July. I have two wonderful daughters. They'd have been perfect on the trip. Couldn't do it because of work. So now I'm really lucky. You may have guessed that. And I'm really lucky because then I started looking through just contacts on my phone. Can you imagine me just asking strangers, hey, what are you doing next summer? Want to sit with a guy you don't know and float down a river all day long and then camp on a sandbar? You know, so I didn't have to do that. What I was able to do is go through my contacts and I'd think the name and I'd picture that person up front. Have I canoed with them before? Have I camped fish with them? And I ended up with what I call the great 8, let me get the fingers right, the great 8 people that were so excited about One4Water, they dedicated part of their summer to it. Now, when I say part of the summer, what they had to do is fill time slots. I was going to start on the 3rd of June. I needed to be done by like the 7th of August. So if somebody said, the first guy, Don, says, I'll go 2 weeks. So now I've got to like the 17th of June covered. Okay. Next guy says I can go 5 days. Next guy, 3 days. We didn't know locations or access points until just a couple days out, but I needed to have every day covered, and they covered them all. And it worked perfectly. They were marvelous people. And one thing that I like to mention about that group of people is that I was the oldest. Not by far. My friend Don was just a few days younger than me, but most of the rest of the people then were many years younger than me. The youngest gentleman is a son of friends of mine and a grandson. In other words, it's a third generation of friends. He was 17, and he went a few days with me. And I don't think he was comfortable at all. He's a big guy, and in that canoe, I think he felt trapped. But I think years from now mean a lot to him. But what I'm getting at is that when I'm in a canoe, I always have to be in the back, not because I'm that good at it, just that's where I'm comfortable. Just because I've canoed many miles doesn't mean I'm an expert at it. I never had any training or anything, but that's where I want to be. And so I'm always in the back. When we get in a situation where if we got to go around some debris or past some whirlpools or something, every time I said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to go really hard right, and then we're going to cut right through that gap, and you kick it and we'll go. Not once did one of those guys turn around and say, you're crazy. You know, what are you thinking? They always trusted me. Whether they should or not, they always did. And I felt really good about that. Now, what was a day like on the river as you're going along? What are the things that you either endure, you enjoy, that makes you happy or makes you anxious? Well, for one thing, you couldn't get out of the sun. I mean, the sun was always there. It's beating from up ahead. It's going off the water. It's going off our canoe. So we'd always keep ourselves usually. Now you see some pictures where I'm in shorts, but most of the time we had long pants and long shirts and stuff on and a lot of sunscreen. You had to endure the sun. Now, as far as river traffic, the main concern, of course, was the barge traffic. And these barges, they can carry one barge. When I talk about one barge, like the ones on the upper Mississippi, let's say they're 3 by 3, so there's 9 of them. And each one of these can hold 1,700 tons of dry materials. And now they're being pushed by these huge diesel engines on this ship, on this boat. So we're sharing the river with them, or trying to. And what would happen, like on the upper Mississippi, where the river's narrower, we'd have to be kind of close to them at times because the shore's right there and the shore's over there. So let's say one's coming upstream, of course, we're going downstream. And when you get right even with them, like by that wall or a little bit further, the turbulence they kick up and the noise of the motors, I mean, it is intimidating. But that's not where we cross their wake. You know, they're going to continue up. We're going to continue down. So about 100, 150 yards down here, I turn the canoe into now that's the big rollers. You go way up the top of the wave, then you come down in the trough. And so that's what it was. We just turn and go way up and way down. And they're far enough apart, when you go down, the next would never fall on you. It's just something you had to get used to. And of course, they're diminishing as you're going along, and you slowly keep going further down with the current. So they were intimidating. They were somewhat scary, but we never got in a bad situation because of them. We just got used to it. Now, other traffic, pleasure boat traffic, that's a different story. We went through Lake Pepin on a weekend, and we had all these big pontoons, pleasure boats, and jet skis, and we're in this little canoe in this huge water out there. We've already got waves because of the wind, and now we're getting in all of their wakes. These people were just friendly as can be. Big pods of sunburned people waving, hi, how you doing? They have no idea what their wake is doing to our little craft, because we want to go this way, but their waves now maybe only this high, but they can get in your canoe and they're close together. So you can't, I mean, you have to stay out of them. So, or go into them. So as we're going south, now we got to turn here and go up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, and then turn again. And now here comes another one. Now we're going up and down, up and down. So we're just zigzagging through the lake instead of continuing on. If they would ever spent much time in a canoe or a kayak, they would have stayed further away and at a slower speed, but they just didn't know. Another thing that we didn't like at all was debris that's in the river. There would be times that there'd be full tree or maybe some big limbs and that floating along. Of course, we just stay away from them. It's not like we're in white water or anything. You see them up in front and you stay away from them. There would be what we referred to as flippies. Those are the waves that are created when the water goes over wing dams, or what they call dikes down the southern Mississippi. Those are riprap structures under the water to funnel the water into the channel so it's deep enough for the barges. And when the river goes over that, it creates turbulence. It'll either create a bunch of waves or it creates these whirlpool fields that I didn't like at all because I don't know nothing about whirlpools. But the waves would just slow us down because sometimes when the rivers real wide, we may have to go a quarter, maybe a half a mile across the river to get to where it's open, where we don't have to go through some real turbulence. And those whirlpools, they'd be maybe as 6 feet or up to 15 feet in diameter, just swirling around. There'd be debris and stuff flying around in them. I mean, when you're a farm boy from Iowa, that's scary. I don't know what, I didn't like that at all. It'd make this kind of whooshing sound. And if you get too close, it'd give the canoe a little shimmy. So when we'd see these fields, and there may be 8 or 9 of them out here ahead of us, we would make sure that we went quickly through them. We never got caught in a big one. I don't know if it just spun us around like a carnival ride and spit us out and say, see ya. I don't know, but we stayed out of them. The other thing that we had to be aware of, well, we could be aware of it, but couldn't do anything about it, is you guys maybe heard of or familiar with Asian silver carp. It's an invasive fish species that was brought to the United States many, many years ago to help with algae blooms and sewage lagoons. And the genie got out of the bottle, so now these fish are in many of our rivers and streams, especially down south. We ran into them from Quincy on. Their defense mechanism when they're startled is to simply jump. Okay, now these are not little fish. The ones that hit us, landed on us, fell in our canoe, or whacked us and stuff, we figure anywhere from 4 to 12 pounds. Now they get bigger. I guess they get twice that size. We didn't have any of those hit us, but what was frightening about them is not just that they hit you and hurt you and stuff, but you never knew when it was going to happen, and it bothered you. If we were out in the channel, because they don't like fast water, we didn't have to worry about them. But if there's a barge coming and a barge going, now we got to get over by the trees. We're in this beautiful, calm water, but that's where they live. And remember the old Jack in the Box, dink. I mean, you knew it was going to happen, but you didn't know when. And out of the blue, there'd be 7 or 8 of these things 8 feet above you. They'd just come flying out, and now they're going to land somewhere, or they're coming sideways, right in past you. Oh, we hated them. Oh, at first it was a curiosity, and that lasted like two jumpings. And then after that, we absolutely hated them. But let's talk about some things that were good. Camping on the river. I like camping. And many times along this, because of course you're outdoors all day long, every minute, every second, you got whatever nature's throwing at you. And the birds that we get to see, the birds we get to hear, like in the mornings, that were wonderful. When the river got really wide, like Memphis on and stuff, almost all the time we would camp on the port side or the east side. The reason being, we'd find a nice sandbar over there, and we had 2 things. One, we'd have the trees, whether willows, sycamores, cottonwoods, whatever. So the next morning, the sun wouldn't hit our tents quite as early when it was already still hot. But then we had wonderful sunsets. A mile, maybe 2 miles across the other side of the river, we get to see the sun go down, and there'd be barges maybe coming by, and of course an eagle or a heron soaring by. So the camping was wonderful. Sometimes we would not want to camp, though. What I mean by that is, as you're doing a trip like this, about every 3rd or 4th day, we need to be resupplied with water or maybe some ice. And about once a week, we should get off the river for a night. Now, maybe in a campground, or maybe actually somebody put us up in their home, or somebody let us stay in a little cabin. But we needed these things. We needed to charge up the phone packs and stuff. More importantly, we needed a shower, and we needed to do laundry. Now, you'll see some pictures where I'm hanging on the canoe, splashing around in the evening. I'm getting cool. I'm certainly not getting clean. And we didn't smell good at all. So now how does that work? If I'm up in Minnesota where this started and go to Long Iowa, I've got friends along there that helped us resupply or take care of our needs at times. Take us to a Walmart so we can get some more food or whatever. But you get past St. Louis, I don't know anybody down there. So how did this work? Well, we found out about a group on Facebook called the Mississippi River Angels. They are people that live along the river, and they are so happy to help people like One4Water that are going down the river with our needs. And it's like a network. Like a good example would be, we were told to call this number, call Beth at Caruthersville, Missouri. So I called Beth at Caruthersville. Beth, this is Hank with One4Water. We're going to be there maybe 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. She goes, what do you need? Well, this is where I'm going to change partners. So we actually need a ride to a hotel that I've already got lined up. We need to get to a Walmart and get some supplies. Well, then we'll need some water and ice. She goes, I'll take care of it. We pull up there. She's the head of the Chamber of Commerce. and she's got 2 of her city employees there with the trailer. Now it's going to storm that night. So they get the One4Water canoe, all of our gear inside an enclosed city shed. They take us to get cleaned up first. Then they take us out to eat, take us to a Walmart. Wonderful, wonderful people. We leave the next day and she gives me a card. She says, now, I don't know if you'll need anything when you get down to Osceola, Arkansas. It's like 4 days away. She says, but if you do, call Sally at this number. Well, sure enough, about 3 days out, Dave and I are talking. He says, you know, we could sure use more water and ice. Let's call this lady Sally at Osceola. So I call Sally up. She goes, when are you going to be at the boat ramp? I said, maybe 2 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Well, we had a good impression because Dave and I got there early, which means we pulled our canoe up, and now we were picking up trash there, which we did whenever we see to pick up a couple bags of trash. Here comes a car with Sally and her husband, Ralph. Sally's the mayor. Ralph is the retired judge. We have the hierarchy of Osceola, Arkansas. And once again, now there's this little gazebo up above the boat ramp with some nice grass with a sign, this is no camping. I go, Sally, she goes, go ahead. So, and then they brought us things like water and ice, but how about ice cold watermelon, you know, that you haven't had all summer. Later that night, they brought back more conversation and a pizza. And we ran into people like that. The very last one was on the Chafalaya River. A guy named Danny Majors. He lives in a place he calls Chafalaya Dreaming. We got a hold of him. We needed a place to stay for the night. He had a little cabin next to his house. We needed to get into town to buy a few supplies. He calls me back. He says, Hank, I'm going to be gone when you show up. Just go through the gate. The key's in the real old suburban there. The little town of Melville is 3 miles away. Go get whatever you need. When you come back, I'll be cooking us up supper. So we show up there, we open the gate, and we get greeted by, Danny's not there, but we get greeted by banty roosters, you know, those little chickens, guinea hens, a pony, a donkey, some ducks, some geese, a peacock. I mean, there are critters of anything you can imagine just following us around. We have to shoo them out of the way. Get in the old Suburban, go to town, get our stuff. When we come back, he's got one of those great big fryers going on the porch, like you put a turkey in, or we put a lot of fish in, you know, run off a 20-pound cylinder of propane. Inside, he's got links of sausage, and he puts a whole number 10 can of corn in this witch's cauldron, and he's stirring this. I go, Danny, you got enough food here for like 30 people. What are you doing? He says, well, eat all you can tonight. Tomorrow, take it to church and give it away. And he goes, oh, by the way, I threw the yellow cat in the fryer out on the porch. Well, Jim and I looked at each other and we wondered, we hoped that the yellow cat had fins instead of fur before it went in the fryer. But he's a wonderful guy. It was only within 10 days that area was hit, was the epicenter of Hurricane Ida. I don't know if you remember that one from 2021. So I called Danny up and he answered. It was a cell phone. I go, Danny, you okay down there? He says, Hank, I'm not only okay. He says, I haven't lost electricity. So I've got the cabin in the house full of people that are less fortunate than me. So those are the kind of people we met as far as the River Angels. They were very, very special. Now you may wonder, why am I on the Chafalaya River? I thought I was going to the Gulf of Mexico. Well, I am, and I did. Just a second here. It's just that when you get close down by Baton Rouge, there's another group of people that live down there on the river. They call themselves the River Gators. And they know all about that area, know more of the river than anybody. And they say, sure, you can go through Baton Rouge, go down to New Orleans and get out to the Gulf. But we don't want you to do it. You can do it if you want, but they highly recommend you not to because of the dangers caused by, once you're from Baton Rouge on, the channel is 45 feet deep and it holds the biggest ships you've ever seen on the ocean, the largest container ships and tankers, along with all the barges. Now, sure, the river's real wide. You think, well, you can get away from. Here's where the tragedies have occurred. You've got a couple tankers or container ships coming. You can imagine the wakes they're throwing out. And because of all the infrastructure on both sides, where they're getting onloaded or offloaded, there are 7-story high ships parked there. You can't get to the shore. You can't get to the trees. You get smashed into those boats from those wakes. We didn't want to do that. We didn't want to go all the way down and have tragedy at the end. So we took their advice. And when you get just north of Baton Rouge, you go through one more lock and you go into the start of the Chafalaya River. Now, centuries ago, that's where almost all the water went. It wanted to go that way to the west, to the Chafalaya Swamp. Once the cities started growing up, you know, you've got Baton Rouge, New Orleans, and then Memphis, St. Louis, and that one, and this commercial traffic, the commercial barge traffic, and back then the keel boats and everything, they decided, hey, we need to keep the water in the Mississippi so that those barges can still go. So there are now 3 huge gates that control the flow that comes out of the Mississippi and goes to Atchafalaya. And nowadays, they only let about 30% of the water go that direction. But it goes through a beautiful swamp, wonderful trees, birds, alligators, really, really cool area. So besides the safety, we wanted to see the swamp. So we did that. One other cool thing about that, as you guys know, swamps and wetlands are nature's sponge, right? Okay, so the Atchafalaya River, it starts where these gates open up and this sediment-filled water from the Mississippi flows into the swamp. Now it's going to take it about a week to get to the sea. We're floating along with it. So that river from where it starts to the sea got cleaner. It's the only river I know that from source to the end got cleaner instead of muddier. That was kind of cool. So that's what that was like going through the swamp. Now, let me talk about this. Why would I write a book about this? This is the book, One4Water. When I started the trip, never planned on writing a book. Now, I have been lucky enough to write a couple of stories that the Iowa DNR has put in their Iowa Outdoors magazines, but they're short stories. You know, you can knock one of those out in a while. A book's a whole different thing. So I was never going to do the book. But keep in mind now, all of those monies that came in for the One4Water donations on the Facebook and that were coming from people, most of them, I don't know, I don't have 1,600 friends. That's how many people are following at the end. They wanted to know where we were, what we'd experienced, who we'd met, and they wouldn't just put a like down there. They're asking questions. So at night, I would do my posts, and then I'd sit there and answer questions. And so many of them said, we love the adventure. We look forward to reading about it every day. It's like we're paddling with you. Would you please write a book so we can relive it? And finally, I had so many people telling me that I embraced the idea and I decided to write the book. And at first, of course, like I said, I'm all about easy. So I thought, I've got this little journal and I've got these Facebook posts. I could cobble that together. And here we go, day 1 to day 64, we're down to the Gulf. But like my wife Ann said, she goes, that'll sound like you paddled, you got tired, you woke up and you paddled, and you got tired again. She goes, for gosh sakes, it's your book. You can put anything, make it special. So there's a couple of unique things about it. First of all, yes, there is a day-to-day explanation of where we were and what we experienced. But I get out of the canoe and I talk about my thoughts, my opinions. Keep in mind, I'm no scientist, so these are opinions. This isn't fact, but I talk about things like trees, water, hope, wilderness, music, and some other things. Like I said, music's so important to me. So another cool thing about this book is you can open any page, and after the end of any session or day or whatever, there'll be a suggested song. There'll be a song that I think is a real cool song that I think should go with those days' activities. I just opened this book right here, this song for, what day is this? 36. The song that goes along with it, I hope you know it, is called After the Gold Rush by Neil Young. And if you go into another page, you'll find one like Where Do the Children Play by Cat Stevens. There's some things they're wonderful songs. Anyway, so now, I thought, if you don't mind, I'd read a little part of the book. The book is available here in the library, or I will have some for sale later that I can sign and personalize for yourself, or if you want to give them to a gift to somebody. But I figured you might want to know what it's like before you do that. So I'm going to read just a little passage. And by the way, I call this a grandchildren-friendly book. I'd be very proud to read it to my 3 granddaughters or yours. There aren't any words in there that are whoopsies. I wish I wouldn't have put that down, so you can read it. It goes like this. This one day, I'm going to pick out day 50. We're moving fast along the port side of the channel later that morning when a barge heading downstream slowly caught up to us. We were giving it a wide berth around a bend of the river when it backed its engines down to an idle. The barge, and I refer to all toast pushing barges as a single barge, even though this one was actually a group of 21 units, was now just floating with the current. The fact that when they caught up to us, they stopped had me confused. Were we in their way? Were they concerned for our safety? Well, I got the radio out of the small tow, pushed the button, and gave them a call. Hey, tow captain, how's it going? This is the canoe on your port side. Are we keeping you from doing what you need to or going where you want to? Through the static, a friendly voice responded, no, you guys are fine. We see you there, and there's room enough for both of us. I just needed to stop and make a couple of adjustments before I handled this corner properly. Dave, who was up front, suggested my next correspondence. That's great, I said. I was just wondering if you needed a tow. Thank you. Kathy was supposed to queue up when people were supposed to laugh. Thank you. Watching the huge diesel-powered vessel go by, my mind wandered, and I started thinking of the river's past and future. When the canoes and keelboats were making their way between its shores, what was the Mississippi like? Was it as wide as it is now? How clear was the water back then? What wildlife and in what numbers drank from it? What will the river and its banks look like a few hundred years from now? I sure hope that in, let's say, 2221, future inhabitants with a bit of wanderlust will be able to enjoy the water, the sandbars, and the trees as we have. A cool thing that popped in my mind was the thought that perhaps if its species was right and its location fortunate, one of the tiny seedlings that I set my tent up by would be a wonderful, massive tree 150 years from now. With that thought, I found myself talking to the small rooted ones. Good luck, little buddy. We're all pulling for you. So that's kind of what the book is like, and that's kind of what the trip was like. And now if you can excuse me for a minute, I'm going to get out of the canoe and jump on a soapbox. I'm going to get philosophical before I take your questions, or what some people consider weird. Let's first talk about time travel. I told you it was going to get weird. You know, people are fascinated with time travel. They have since Jules Verne wrote about it. We go to movies about it. People read stories about it. And I basically think they're curious about being able to go somewhere in the past and do one little thing that then will make the future better. We just need to go back in the past, do some little thing so the future will be better. But, you know, we can't. Nobody's been able to do a time loop like that yet. But you know what we do have? We don't have the past anymore, but we got right now. We've got the present, and we got the future, and the future, and the future, and the future. So instead of dreaming about going back and doing something that'll help the future, let's do what we can right now, because we can. We can do that now. Let's do something in the present that'll help the future so years from now things will just be as good or maybe better. And you know, another problem that we have as humanity, we don't live long enough. You know, I know we'd all like to think we're going to live forever, but we don't. Someplace, we don't know where, but there's an expiration date. And especially when you get to be my age, you're thinking, well, it's someplace in the 70s, 80s, 90s, or maybe behind if you're lucky, but you're done. You know, we don't get to live forever, and it makes us apathetic. It gives us an out. What I mean by that is how many times, especially as you get older, have you heard people say, I'll never live to see it. It's not going to happen in my lifetime. I ain't going to worry about it. But let's do this. Let's say that when we were 20 or 30 years old, we knew we were going to get to live as long as the longest lived trees on our planet. We knew that our lifespan expectancy was 700, 900, maybe 2,000 years. You know what? We'd take better care of our home if we knew we'd be around here 1,000 years from now, because we would live to see it. We would be here when it happened. And that's how we have to not think about the present, just gobble up everything we can just to get richer or do this or that. We got to think about, what if we were here 200 years from now, 500 years from now? What can we do now so that that stuff is still here for people to enjoy? One last thing before I do the questions is, I gotta grab another quick drink here. Years ago, I read a marvelous book by an author named Barry Lopez, and it's called Arctic Dreams. I don't know if anybody has read it, but it's fabulous. Oh my goodness, I wish I was that smart. Most of the book is about his travels to the very, very far north to talk to the indigenous people up there and write down some of their history. They would do, as many of the people that were native to the North America, they didn't write down a history, they told stories. How cool is this? They told stories generationally. Something cool would be happening, so they'd write a story about it, not write it, they'd make up a story about it. And the next generation hear the same stories over and over and over again. So he went up there to write down their stories and to see especially what it was like when the first European explorers, when they first got there, what those interactions were like and what changes occurred. But he's also a tremendous conservationist. And a gentleman asked him one day, Mr. Lopez, what do you think of the future of our planet? And he said, well, it's easy to believe we're headed for extinction. I mean, we're on a planet with very impersonal physical, chemical, and biological laws, and we're breaking them. We're using things up. But then he said a more engaging view, and the one that we must take is this. As a civilization, we're smart enough to identify the problems. We'll figure out what's wrong. We'll have the composure to not be intimidated by the complexities, and we will find the courage to take the necessary steps, even when we know they will bear no fruit in our lifetimes. Now, it's my hope that the little trip like One4Water and that book, that maybe I've taken a couple of those steps, and I feel at least that I've kind of balanced that ledger, that I owe that debt to this wonderful world. Now, I sure hope I can answer a bunch of great questions.
Okay, yeah, we're live. Any questions? I'll bring the mic to you so we pick you up on the.
Oh, that's right. You have to have the mic.
Right. You want to start? Yeah.
One thing I'm very concerned about is the insect apocalypse and how 80% of the world insects are gone. And my question is, are you aware of it?
As I've told you before, I'm no scientist. I have read about that, and I'm concerned too, but I don't know how to fix it. Hopefully, people smarter than me will have the funding or the knowledge to do it. I can tell you one thing about insects. On our trip, there were a couple places that where we camped, we had to be very careful where we walked or where we touched because it was covered with butterflies. One of the camps was about 7 different varieties, and one, they were all the same, and I'm no entomologist. I can't even tell you what they were, but they sure were beautiful. And I sure appreciate your concern, ma'am, but I'm not the one to ask about how we keep the insects around.
I've got 2 questions, and I think you kind of answered one. They're both somewhat practical. One is, were you getting water to drink from stores? I'd cross the Mississippi up in Itasca, and I'd feel comfortable pumping it, filtering it up there. But later on down the line, were you getting store-bought water? And then second, how often did you have to stealth camp? Camp where maybe they didn't say go ahead and camp, where you might find yourself just having to camp somewhere.
Okay, great question. First of all, on the water, unlike our trip north, that once we got past Lake Winnipeg, we could just drink it. We weren't drinking that water. Now, we could treat it, we could filter it. It'd still look bad, but it wouldn't hurt us. But we didn't do that. We had people bring us water at different stops, and we would just fill them in. I repurposed 12 plastic jugs, like milk jugs, so that we would have then 96 pounds of water with us when we filled up those, because we were going through 2 gallons per person per day when down south. But yeah, we would just go to a place and they just fill it out of a hose or whatever. Now, as far as the camping, we did sandbar camping, and you know where I'm at now, and the river was low, so we were good. We were legal wherever we were because we were on the river, so to speak. Great questions. Rick.
Hey, then one question. I'm a Mississippi River native. The picture at elevation, look at the lock and dam. Is that Bellevue?
Ooh, I'd have to look.
Okay. Then just a comment for folks that haven't read the book. I highly recommend it. I read it, and it's so nice with now Google Maps. You can zero in, and so I just floated down on the maps with you every day.
Oh, thank you, Rick.
And
appreciate it.
Hank's writing style is just like his conversational style. You feel
somebody got a question about alligators, I hope, because I got a story. Can I just tell a quick story about alligators? So the very first alligator we saw, my friend Jim's up front. It's raining like everything on us, and I'm paddling over this way, and all of a sudden I hear him say, "Henry." It's the only word he said, but it was my name and the way he said it. And I looked up front. He's got his paddle on his left-hand side, and right underneath his paddle is this alligator head. You know, with those eyes that go wrong, funky looking and that. And we're just both looking at it, and now without a splash or a sound, disappeared. It was gone. Now, 2 days later, after we'd seen several more that would be up on sandbars, they'd splash in as we went by. We're going along down there in the swamp, and all of a sudden, Jimmy's doing this. I thought, what in the world? I mean, he's my age, so I thought maybe it's complete sudden onslaught of dementia just happened like that, or heat stroke, or malnutrition. Not enough water. I didn't know what he was doing, but I knew darn well he wasn't going to stop until I acknowledged it, till he knew that I saw him. So I let him do it for a while. Why not? I'm kind of entertained. Pretty soon I had to give up. I go, Jimmy, hey, Jim, what's going on up there, bud? He goes, oh, Hank, I feel so sorry for them. I go, sorry for what, Jim? He goes, the alligators. He says, their arms are so short. No matter how hard they try, they can't reach their ears, and they have to listen to your singing. True story. He's a funny guy.
Just a simple question. How did you get home?
That's a great question. My brother Keith, who lives here in town, he jumped in my big Silverado pickup and drove it all the way down to the Gulf and took the canoe and all our gear. And we stopped at Carruthersville on the way back to see the friends we made there. So it was a 2-day trip coming back. By the way, one little interesting note about the trip, we called it One4Water, going down the river and that. Well, my wife Ann that's back there and her good friend Joe, whose husband was in the front of the canoe with me, all the way from Carruthersville to Vicksburg, they drove down there then to switch out and bring Dave back. And so our trip was called One4Water. Ann's trip down there, which took several days, was called 2 for Wine. Did you have a...
Hudson Bay.
I had made arrangement ahead of time to call back to Winnipeg, and there's a guy named Dick Dagg, D-A-G-G. I found out later he's kind of a shaky guy, but he was kind of a go-between between himself and float plane pilots. And he had arranged a pilot from God's Lake Narrows to land at York Factory, pick us and our canoes up, and take us back to God's Lake. And then from there, we had to figure it out. Now, how did we do that? We rented an ultra-high frequency radio in Winnipeg. It would cost us $1,200 back then for the summer rental, and we had to get a license for it, XNR3 Portable Norway House. I'll never forget that was our license number. And we could get on the microphone and listen after we turned it on to see if there's any other traffic because other mines, other fishing camps would be on there. And if it was quiet, we would call back to the station in Selkirk, Manitoba, and have them patch us into phone lines. We did it not only to be able to get that float plane back, but mostly in case we had an emergency. I mean, that we were able to, hopefully, if we could get through, only about 30% of the time it worked, but if we could get through, I could call an Ann back in Ames, which I did sometimes. You know, I'd say, Ann, how you doing? Over. And she'd ask, where you at? Over. And so we used it for that, but that's how we got back. And then when we got to God's Lake, now we still got to go hundreds of miles to get back to the airport at Winnipeg where my dad would come and pick us up. And it just so happened Gilbert Burton, the fabulous pilot that came and got us, a native from up there, he goes, how are you guys getting this stuff back to Winnipeg? I said, I don't know, we're going to try to figure this out. He goes, well, you know what? He says, I could use some more airplane fuel. If I call up a big DC-3 to come from Winnipeg full of barrels of airplane fuel, if you help me unload them and you pay for part of the cost. So we unloaded this fuel one day. We put ourselves in our canoes into this empty transport. We sat in the same canoe seats that we've been in all summer as we flew back to Winnipeg, and we shared the cost with that pilot. Those are stories that are in Denny's book. I mean, things happen back when you're in your 20s that are just amazing how they all work out. And you never think about it ahead of time. You know, it just happens and it's perfect.
I only have one question. I don't need the microphone. Was one of your pictures, it looked like there were ducks riding on the back of an alligator.
Okay, yeah, those are actually terns, and it looks like an alligator, but it's just a log. It was just some debris.
Did you see any big, tall, black, brown things?
You mean like Sasquatch or bears or humans or what?
Yeah.
No, we didn't see anything unusual. And the most interesting animals we saw on the whole trip, of course, were people. Wonderful people. Wonderful people.
Any more questions from, of course, back in the room?
You can just yell.
Yeah, well, we do have one person online, so.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, we got to do that.
Tell us about the place in Louisiana where you decided you would finish the trip. It was over.
Did you say where was that?
Yeah, where was it? And tell us a little bit about it.
Okay, it was at Morgan City. It's about 17 miles from actually being in the ocean at a place called Burnt Point. I opted to not go those last 17 miles. And the reason being is my brother was already down there, and the channel that would get us to the Gulf doesn't line up to where the road can go. So we'd have got to the ocean and had to go a few miles, not a long distance, but a few miles of ocean canoeing to get to where the road was. And I didn't want to have something bad happen at the very end. You know, I grew up on a farm and I don't know anything about tides and river currents. And we were already in brackish water and we're canoeing by shrimp boats. And I said, that's good enough. Let's go home. Great question.
Out of all your pictures of the natural world, there was a picture of a row of cannons.
Yeah, that's at Vicksburg.
Oh, Vicksburg.
That's from the siege of Vicksburg in the Civil War. And it's actually a Civil War National Park that's there at Vicksburg that we spent about most of a day touring through. And that interesting thought I had there, because you're actually at the battle site and both sides embedded themselves deep in the ground. They built caves and tunnels to try to survive. You know, this went on, I don't remember the exact number of times, but maybe like 2 months of this going on until the South finally, they couldn't get resupplied, so they gave up. But what I thought about is when you go through this very solemn area now, there are some oak trees there with this big diameter. And you know enough about oak trees. How old do you suppose that bugger is?
300 years.
Old enough, it was there. It was there when it went on. I'll bet, you know, that if you'd had a metal detector, there's got to be shrapnel and stuff in some of those trees. Yeah.
Speaking of trees, Hank, what was the wood carving that was in one of your photos?
Okay, that's an island upstream from Muscatine. Cale was with me at that time, but we stopped there just for a little lunch break. And there are these totems or carvings. There's about a dozen of them, real spooky looking, no explanation. Don't know anything more about them except we took some pictures and got the heck out of there. So they weren't welcoming looking. They weren't friendly like, but somebody put a lot of work into them. They were amazing. Like I said, there was a bunch of them. Weird.
Any further questions?
Here's somebody back there right now.
And where is the next trip?
I don't have anything. Ask my wife right in front of you. No, I don't have any extensive trip planned at this time. I may, if you know of something cool. First of all, I'm not going to walk a long distance, so I'm going to have to float or paddle. I don't have anything extravagant lined up. So I'm fishing all the time, but I don't have any big trips. Yes, ma'am.
What's your favorite place in the boundary waters?
Well, I did the stair step portage. We went into Rose Lake. That's a long time ago with our kids. So that was kind of cool. I don't go there. I go further north to camp in some places in Ontario. And the reason simply is that I found a region in Ontario, east of Sioux Narrows and Esther Falls, that you're still allowed to camp there as a U.S. citizen, anywhere you want. You have to have permits, but you don't have to reserve campsites. And there are no real regular campsites. You just go where you want to. And so you don't run into many people. You don't have to worry about being at a campsite that somebody else is at. If somebody really likes the Boundary Waters experience, okay, I highly recommend look up Woodland Caribou Provincial Park, west of Red Lake, Ontario, because if you're experienced enough and you don't mind working and you don't mind if it takes a while, you will be in the wilderness and it's beautiful and you won't see anybody else. So look that up and do that. I'm getting the, hey, we're done. Thank you very much, folks.
Okay, thank you very much.